Let me ask you one simple question. Why is it that Shakespeare is studied today globally and Ngugi wa Thiong'o is still an optional reading in most of the curricula today? Why is it that when we hear the phrase an epic in blank verse, the first title that strikes our mind is John Milton's Paradise Lost and not Savitri by Sri Aurobindo Ghosh? Today, the theory that we are going to study will help us ask and answer these questions. Hello everyone, I'm Riya Gandhi and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we are going to dive into one of the most important and frequently asked theories in UGC NET English exam, and that is post-colonial theory. So what we are going to do today is that we are going to get a quick overview of what is post-colonial theory, its important concepts, and some of the major theorists associated with it. And then in the coming videos that I will be making, it will be a deep dive into each of these theorists and their concepts that I will be dealing with in detail. Right? So for today, make sure that you stick around till the end of this video and don't forget to make notes. Let us start our discussion with one simple question. What is colonialism? We have all heard this term, right? And we all know that colonialism is the political and the economic domination of one country over another, right? Think about the British rule in India, the Belgian control in Congo, or the Spanish conquest in Latin America, and so on and so forth. But the question here isn't just what is colonialism. The question also here is that what happens after the colonizers leave, right? What about the psychological impact on the colonized? What about the kind of inferiority, the cultural inferiority that they felt during this period of time, right? The kind of language loss, the language barriers they faced, the rewriting of history. All of these are basically talking about post-colonialism. You can take all of these terms as sort of keywords for post-colonial theory, right? Post-colonialism is not just a historical period. It's a critical lens through which we understand literature that was produced during this point of time and also after the colonial times. Post-colonialism as a literary theory asks some of the most seminal questions, like who gets to write history? What does it mean to speak in the language of the colonizers? And most importantly, can the colonized even represent themselves fully? So when we are talking about post-colonialism, it sort of finds itself at the crossroads of power, resistance, language, memory, subversion. And how did it reach these crossroads? Through the medium of literature. So post-colonial criticism, as we all know about it, is a method of reading literature. It's a critical lens through which we analyze the texts, right? So as a post-colonial critique, what is your job? Basically, you have to examine how the colonized people are represented in the texts, right? How the cultural ideology is so fed into their minds that they forget their own cultural roots, right? They forget their own diversity, right? How language becomes a tool of control, right? How the stories are represented, how the history is represented, whose stories are represented, who gets to represent their story and who is silenced. How characters talk about exile, memory, homeland. All of these become really, really important concepts when we talk about post-colonial theory. And definitely, this is not it. This is just a quick overview of it. You have a lot of theorists making this theory more nuanced, more complex, more inclusive, right? Theorists like Edward Said, right, who talked about the concept of Orientalism, right, talking about how the West sort of represented the exotic East in order to control it. Then you must have also heard about Homi Bhabha and his concepts like hybridity, mimicry, ambivalence, third space, right? Topics that we will definitely cover in detail, right? Then you must have also heard about Gayatri Chakraborty's Bhabha and her famous essay, Can the Subaltern Speak?, wherein she talks about whether the oppressed get to truly represent their voice in the central discourse. Right? So don't worry if you don't understand these concepts and the theorist right now, right? Because this is just a generic overview of their ideas and their themes. We will be covering each and every theorist in detail in the subsequent videos, which will definitely help you get a very comprehensive idea about them and their concepts. So if you haven't subscribed to this channel yet, please do so right now so that you will be notified and you will be updated whenever the next video pops in. So when we talk about post-colonial theory or post-colonial theorists for that matter, one thing that you have to keep in mind is that all of them, they try to sort of challenge the Eurocentric canon. What is a Eurocentric canon? Basically, the canon that refers to a body of literature, art, which emphasizes the Western or the European traditions and perspectives, right? It emphasizes on the Western perspectives more over the Eastern ideas or the Eastern story or the Eastern perspective, right? So these theorists and post-colonial theory in general is trying to challenge and resist the Eurocentric canon and try to offer ways in which you can read the Asian, the Caribbean, the African text in a different manner, right, from the perspective of the colonized. Having said that, this was post-colonial theory in general, but this is not it. Over the period of time, what you see happening in post-colonial theory is certain offshoots, certain branches coming out of it. There is one branch of gender and post-colonialism, one branch of race and post-colonialism, right, which should make your understanding of post-colonial theory also very nuanced. So we are going to get a quick overview of these offshoots as well, because it's very important for you to have that understanding, right? So starting with gender and post-colonialism. Think about it, as women, to have a position in the society today, it took years of struggle, right? But imagine that time in which the colonizers already had a lot of dominance over the colonized. And then at that point of time, to be a woman, to struggle not just against the patriarchy that was prevalent in the society, but also the colonial powers. Right, so a lot of times, a lot of post-colonial feminist theorists have definitely argued this, that the colonized women was doubly oppressed. First, by the colonial patriarchy and then by native patriarchy. So a lot of post-colonial novels, especially the novels that foreground the role of women in society, especially the colonial society, they emphasize the kind of issues they faced during that point of time. Issues like exile, like hybridity, like identity crisis, right? Some of the best examples that I can give you right now are Jean Rhys's White Sargasso Sea. It refers to Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre and specifically one of the characters, right, the mad woman in the attic, Bertha Mason, and how she came from a colonial background, like she was a Creole woman, and the kind of experiences that she had living with Mr. Rochester. Again, very deeply moving narrative. Then you definitely have The God of Small Things by Arundhati Roy. You have Half of a Yellow Sun by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, right? Very, very important novels, narratives that are frequently asked in UGC NET English exam. And then we talk about race and post-colonialism. I think when we talk about this intersection, the best example that I can give you of right now is Frantz Fanon. Right, we will definitely be going in detail about his views, his concepts, his works, most importantly, black skin, white masks. A very, very frequently asked work in UGC NET exam. It basically explores how black identity was psychologically damaged under the colonial rule. So when we talk about post-colonial theory, understand that it's more intersectional. It helps us read intersectionally. We are not just talking about one kind of oppression, right? One kind of experience. Having said that, now let's move on to a different concept under post-colonialism that it's also often talked about. Under post-colonialism, we find a lot of people, right? A lot of scholars, a lot of students, a lot of professors, a lot of academicians debating the concept of nation. The idea of nationhood. What is nation? Are we talking about the geographical boundaries here? Are we talking about the community over here? What are we talking about? Right? So to talk about this concept of nation and nationhood, you have Benedict Anderson, right? Who gave the concept of imagined communities in the work Imagined Communities, wherein he argued that nations are sort of constructed through shared language, shared culture, ideas, stories, folk tales, oral traditions, symbols. It's not something that's natural, it's not something that's biological, right? So post-colonial theory also reimagines the concept of nation and nationhood. Who belongs to a nation? Are we talking about the geographical boundaries, geographical landscapes when we are talking about nation, right? Who is left out, right? How do borders, languages, memories create identities, right? So very, very nuanced, very, very interesting also when we talk about it, because it sort of like opens up our horizons when we talk about nation and nationhood. Now, having said that, we are going to end our discussion by quickly taking an overview over 5 most important concepts that you should know for your UGC NET English exam. The first one is neocolonialism. So even after colonialism, there is still some form of economic and cultural domination that continues in different countries, right? Through companies, media, or for that matter, even some kind of linguistic dominance, right? Wherein our ideas of progress and development are sort of like measured against the Western yardsticks. Right? So this is called as neocolonialism, wherein colonization is not very direct. Second, diaspora. You must have come across this term, you must have had some idea of diaspora, right? Diaspora is wherein people are forced to leave or they voluntarily migrate from their own homelands due to war, colonization, or economic reasons, right? So they become a part of a diaspora, a community that is present outside of their country, right? Their ethnic community that is present outside of their home country. What is central to the discussion of diaspora are the concepts of memory, homeland, longing, exile, separation, identity, rootlessness, and living in those in-between liminal spaces. You will see me repeating these words, especially liminal, lots of times in the coming videos, especially on post-colonial theory, and you'll soon know what liminal means. Right? Then next is multiculturalism, right? Because people can move to different countries for work, for marriage, for studies, for different purposes, right? They create multicultural societies, multiple ethnic and racial groups coexist with each other. That brings me to the concept of cosmopolitanism, wherein we have now this global citizen. You move beyond a national or an ethnic identity. People from different groups, people from different national backgrounds, they meet each other, they marry each other, right? So again, being a part of global citizenship. And then finally, you have the concept of post-national, wherein in this world of globalization, borders are sort of blurred, right? Especially the national borders are blurred. Post-nationalism basically explores what it is to live beyond rigid national identities. You can create national communities through social media, right? Especially in post-colonial literature, it's very important to understand these post-national communities formed on the internet, right? How people share their experiences, how their experiences are different, right? Depending on the countries they are living in, depending on the cultures that they share, the cultures that they are exposed to, all of those things. So with this, we now come to the end of our discussion for today. Please remember that when we talk about post-colonial theory, it teaches us to ask these questions. That is, who is speaking? Who gets to speak? Who is represented and how? Who is being silenced? And what are the power dynamics at play? How is power circulated? With this, we now come to an end of our discussion today. Definitely in the coming videos, I will be diving deeper into the theorists and their theories, the concepts that they have provided, specifically Homi K. Bhabha, Edward Said, Gayatri Chakraborty Spivak, some of the most important theorists that are frequently asked in UGC NET English exam. Until then, if you have found this video helpful, please like, share and subscribe to my channel. And yes, thank you so much for watching till the end, guys. I'll see you in the next one.